When the galaxy's self-proclaimed ultimate predators discover their dominance, means little when faced with humans who have turned Earth's most dangerous creatures into companions. What follows is a lesson in true power, one that doesn't rely on claws or teeth, but on understanding, patience, and the uniquely human ability to make friends with monsters. Krelvax's bioluminescent scales flickered with barely contained disdain as he watched the human facility through the ship's observation portal. The supreme hunter of the Nx'thari had expected more from a species that had caused such concern among the Galactic Security Council. Instead, he was staring at what appeared to be a collection of primitive enclosures nestled against a mountainside, surrounded by forests that wouldn't have looked out of place in a pre-industrial world. "Remind me again," he rumbled to his scientific analyst, Nx'thari, "why we're wasting time assessing these soft-skinned prey creatures." Nx'thari's data tendrils twisted in what their species considered a diplomatic shrug. The Council is concerned about their rapid advancement, particularly their tendency to, she consulted her neural feed, form alliances with other species. Alliances? Krelvax's secondary breathing vents hissed with amusement. "We are the apex predators of 3 spiral arms. We hunt beings that would make their strongest warriors flee in terror. What could they possibly teach us about dominance?" The answer came in the form of Winter Blackwood, who was currently scratching the chin of a creature that made even Krelvax's reinforced exoskeleton tingle with ancestral warning signals. "Welcome to Horizon's Edge," Winter called out, seemingly oblivious to the fact that she was using one of Earth's most lethal predators as a makeshift backrest. The massive lion's eyes were half closed in contentment, its silver-streaked mane rustling in the mountain breeze. "I'm guessing you're our visitors from the Nx'thari Empire?" Xereth, the youngest of the delegation, stepped forward with his combat spines fully extended, a traditional display of Nx'thari dominance. "You dare greet the Supreme Hunter while consorting with an unbounded predator?" Winter blinked, looked at the lion, then back at the aliens. "Oh, you mean Starweaver? He's a sweetheart once you get to know him, aren't you, big guy?" The lion responded with a rumbling purr that vibrated through the ground beneath their feet. "Impossible," Krelvax declared, his scales now pulsing with agitation patterns that hadn't been seen since the great hunt of the 7th sector. "That creature is clearly one of your world's apex predators. Its biological programming should make it." "Try to eat me?" Winter finished, now actively giving the lion a belly rub. "Yeah, that's a common misconception. Turns out, biological programming is more of a suggestion than a rule. Right, Ash?" A tall figure emerged from one of the nearby structures, and for a moment, Krelvax felt his hunter's instincts relax. Finally, a human displaying proper caution. This one was wearing protective gear and carrying what appeared to be a restraining device. Then, he noticed the figure was wearing the protection to handle a much smaller creature, and his confusion returned to full force. "Careful with the assumption," Ash Thorne called out, cradling what appeared to be a black and white ball of fur. Last being that underestimated a honey badger ended up rethinking their life choices. From a medical, Krelvax watched in growing disbelief as the supposedly supreme predator of Earth continued to act like an oversized domesticated pet, while the humans treated a creature a fraction of its size with elaborate. Something was very wrong with this picture, and his species' celebrated hunting instincts were providing exactly zero useful insight into what it might be. "Perhaps Thalcor," their diplomatic observer suggested quietly. "We should suspend judgment until we better understand their method." Krelvax's scales shifted to a pattern that indicated profound skepticism, but he had to admit, not that he would do so out loud, that nothing about this situation matched their intelligence. Those reports had described humans as physically weak, technologically young, and naturally defensive. They had not mentioned anything about humans casually rewriting the rules of predator and prey while giving apex predators chin scratch. "Very well," he announced, trying to maintain his dignity while a lion rolled over for a belly rub in his direct line of sight. "Show us these methods of yours." Winter's grin should have triggered his warning instincts. Instead, it triggered something far more dangerous: curiosity. Krelvax's pride had survived 3 galactic hunt games, but it was currently being wounded by watching a human female half his size, giving instructions to creatures that, by all evolutionary rules, should have been trying to. "The first rule," Winter announced, leading the alien delegation through the sanctuary's main compound, his understanding that dominance isn't the same as respect. She paused by an enclosure where a massive tiger with midnight black stripes was undergoing what appeared to be a voluntary medical examination. Eclipse here came to us after being rescued from an illegal exotic pet operation, Winter explained while Juniper Frost, their lead veterinarian, checked the tiger's teeth with nothing more than a gentle hand and soft word. Traditional methods would suggest we need to break her spirit to handle her safely. Instead, we taught her that cooperation leads to better outcomes for everyone. Impossible, Nx'thari declared, his junior hunter's enthusiasm making him bold. Predators respect only superior strength. It is the law of nature. Nx'thari's data tendrils twitched with interest as she recorded the scene. And yet, evidence suggests these humans have found some way to suppress natural instincts, Krelvax interrupted, his scales pulsing with uncertainty patterns. Perhaps through chemical means? Winter's laugh echoed off the mountain walls. You think we're drugging them? Eclipse, show them your morning exercise. The tiger, who had just finished her examination, padded to a nearby training area. What followed made Krelvax's primary heart skip a beat. The massive predator began navigating an obstacle course that would have challenged most sentient beings, responding to subtle hand signals from Winter with precise movement. No drugs, Winter said, tossing a treat that Eclipse caught mid-leap. Just trust, patience, and a lot of positive reinforcement. Trust? Nx'thari's combat spines bristled. Trust is for prey species. A true predator relies only on their own strength. Winter's expression shifted to something that made even Krelvax's warrior instincts suggest taking a step back. Really? Care to test that? She led them to a larger enclosure, where a pack of Arctic wolves moved like ghosts through artificial snow. At their center, a massive white wolf watched the delegation with eyes that seemed to contain more intelligence than any non-sentient creature should possess. This is Ghost, Winter introduced. He's going to help demonstrate why your understanding of predator psychology might need some up. You can't possibly suggest, Krelvax began. But Winter was already opening the enclosure. Actually, she said with a smile that promised both enlightenment and embarrassment, that's exactly what I'm suggesting. Who wants to go first? The silence that followed was broken only by Ghost's eerily knowing gaze and what sounded suspiciously like a snicker from Nx'thari's. Sometimes, Krelvax reflected, being Supreme Hunter meant doing things you knew were going to end up in someone else's training manual under the heading What Not to Do. He stepped forward, his bioluminescent scales glowing with challenge patterns. Very well, human. Show us these methods that defy natural. Winter's smile widened. Oh, I won't be showing you anything. Ghost will be doing the teaching today. I'm just here to make sure nobody's pride gets hurt worse than their dignity. Looking at the wolf's calculating eyes, Krelvax had a sinking feeling that both his pride and dignity were about to undergo significant renovation. The demonstration began with what Krelvax would later describe in his official report as a profound reassessment of established predator-prey dynamics, or, as Winter, Ghost's masterclass in humility. The key, Winter explained while Ghost circled the Supreme Hunter with calculated precision, isn't about who's stronger, it's about communication, understand, and... She paused as Ghost executed a perfect flanking maneuver that made Krelvax spin in place, his combat reflexes thoroughly confused. Knowing when strength isn't the answer, the white wolf moved like flowing water, never aggressive, yet somehow managing to control every aspect of Krelvax's movement through the enclosure. Each time the Supreme Hunter tried to establish dominance through traditional Nx'thari displays, Ghost simply wasn't where the display was, appearing instead at Krelvax's blind spot, with what looked suspiciously like amusement in his ice blue eyes. Fascinating, Nx'thari murmured, her data tendrils practically vibrating with excitement. The creature is using minimal energy expenditure to achieve maximum psychological impact. It's treating combat as a conversation rather than a conquest. Precisely, Winter nodded. Ghost isn't trying to prove he's stronger. He's demonstrating that he doesn't need. Nx'thari, watching his supreme leader being systematically outmaneuvered by what his species would have classified as a mid-tier predator, felt his combat spines wilting. But we are the apex predators of 3 spiral arms. We have hunting techniques passed down through generations. His protest was interrupted by a new arrival. Juniper Frost appeared at the enclosure's edge, carrying what appeared to be medical supplies. Ghost, who had been in the middle of another elaborate demonstration of why Nx'thari combat tactics were useless against Earth predators, immediately trotted over and sat down. "Sorry to interrupt the lesson in interstellar humility," Juniper said, not sounding sorry at all, "but it's time for Ghost's chat." The alien delegation watched in stunned silence as the wolf that had just made their supreme hunter look like an amateur hunter in training, submitted to a medical examination with all the compliance of a well-trained hound. Krelvax finally managed, his scales now displaying patterns that hadn't been seen since the Great Confusion of the Fifth Dynasty. "How do you command such obedience without establishing dom?" Winter's expression softened. "That's just it. We don't command. We cooperate. Ghost allows these examinations because he understands they're for his benefit. He works with us because we've proven ourselves trustworthy partners, not because we've dominated." "Partners?" Thalcor, who had been quietly observing until now, stepped forward. "You treat these predators as equals?" "Sometimes," Winter replied, watching as Ghost gently placed his paw in Juniper's hand for inspection. "We treat them as teachers." The silence that followed was broken only by the soft sounds of Juniper's examination and Nx'thari's furious data. Krelvax stood very still, his hunter's instincts trying to process a paradigm shift that threatened everything his species had believed about predator-prey relations. Nx'thari, however, was having none of it. His junior hunter's pride, already wounded by watching his supreme leader's dignity take a beating, finally snapped. "This proves not. I will show you how a true predator establishes dominance." Before anyone could react, he charged toward Ghost, combat spines fully extended in the Nx'thari's most aggressive display of dominance. What happened next would be recorded in Nx'thari's databanks as Incident 47B. Why understanding beats aggression every time, and in Winter's personal log as the day an alien learned physics, the hard. Ghost, rather than responding with either fear or aggression, simply sidestepped at the last possible. Nx'thari, his momentum carrying him forward, found himself executing what Winter would later describe as a perfect demonstration of parabolic motion with a slight spin. The young hunter landed in a snowdrift, his combat spines tangled in his own ceremonial hunting cloak, while Ghost sat nearby with an expression that somehow managed to convey both patience and peace. "And that," Winter said into the stunned silence, "is why we start with the basics of mutual respect before moving on to advanced technique." The transformation in Krelvax's understanding began not with a roar, but with a quiet realization. As Winter helped a thoroughly humbled Nx'thari extract himself from the snowdrift, the Supreme Hunter watched Ghost return to Juniper, resuming his medical examination as if nothing had happened. "I don't understand," Krelvax admitted, his scales shifting to a pattern that indicated deep thought. "Our entire civilization is built on the principle that superior strength commands respect, yet these creatures, who could easily overpower, choose not to," Winter finished, brushing snow off a still-dazed Nx'thari. "That's the part most species miss. True power isn't about having the ability to hurt others. It's about having that ability and choosing not to." Nx'thari moved closer to the enclosure, her data tendrils weaving complex patterns of fascination. "The implications are, our entire database of predator psychology may need." As if to emphasize her point, Starweaver chose that moment to pad into view, the massive lion moving with casual grace. Instead of approaching Winter, however, he stopped near Krelvax, regarding the alien with what could only be described as professional courtesy. "He's offering you a chance to try again," Winter explained, noticing Krelvax's confused scale patterns. This time without the dominance display. The Supreme Hunter of the Nx'thari, conqueror of 3 spiral arms, found himself facing a challenge unlike any in his extensive hunting career. The challenge of not being challenged. What should I do?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Start by relaxing those combat spines," Winter suggested. "You're here to learn, not compete." Starweaver understands that better than most. He used to be quite the fighter himself, before he learned there are better ways to earn respect. Slowly, with the careful precision that had made him legendary among his people, Krelvax retracted his combat spine. His scales shifted from their usual aggressive patterns to something softer, more Starweaver responded by sitting down, his silver-streaked mane catching the afternoon. The lion's posture was neither submissive nor dominant. It was, Krelvax realized with growing amazement, invitation. Remember, Winter said softly, he's not your opponent or your subject. Think of him as a colleague with a different perspective on life. A colleague, Krelvax repeated, testing the concept like a new hunting technique. He took a careful step forward, then another. Starweaver watched him with ancient eyes that held neither fear nor aggression, only a patient wisdom that made the Supreme Hunter feel strangely. Behind them, Nx'thari's data tendrils were practically tying themselves in knots, trying to record every detail of this unprecedented Thalcor, the diplomatic observer, was already composing what would become one of the most revolutionary reports in Nx'thari history. Even Xyrith, still picking snow out of his ceremonial cloak, watched with growing fascination as his supreme leader learned what might be the most important hunting lesson of his career. Sometimes the greatest strength lies in choosing not to. What happened next would be recorded in multiple databases across the galaxy, though each species would describe it. To the Nx'thari historical archives, it was the great paradigm shift. To Earth's diplomatic corps, it was the lion's share of wisdom. To Winter Blackwood's personal, it was simply the day an alien learned to. Starweaver lowered his massive head, allowing Krelvax to experience something no Nx'thari had ever felt before, the gentle headbutt of acceptance from Earth's most formidable. The Supreme Hunter's scales cycled through colors that hadn't been seen since the first Nx'thari encountered. Extraordinary, Nx'thari breathed, her data tendrils documenting every microsecond. The level of trust required for this interaction defies all our previous models of predator behavior. Winter watched with quiet satisfaction as the alien who had arrived, convinced of his species' superiority, now sat in perfect stillness, experiencing what she liked to call the fellow-form enlightenment. Starweaver had sprawled beside Krelvax, his silver-streaked mane brushing against the alien's iridescent scale, creating a light show that would have made Aurora Borealis. You know, she said conversationally, Eclipse was a lot like you when she first arrived, convinced that power was the only language worth speaking. Now watch this. She turned toward the enclosure where the tiger with midnight black stripes was lounging. Eclipse, would you show our guests your latest project? What followed made even Xyrith forget his wounded pride. Eclipse padded over to a series of what appeared to be puzzle boxes, each more complex than the last. With surgical precision, she began manipulating the mechanisms, demonstrating problem-solving skills that many sentient species would. We didn't teach her how to solve these, Juniper added, appearing with her medical kit. We just showed her that figuring things out could be rewarding. She developed her own technique. Krelvax watched as the tiger systematically deconstructed puzzles that would have challenged his species' engineers. You mean to tell me that instead of forcing compliance, encourage innovation, cooperation, mutual respect? Turns out these are universal language. Winter confirmed. Even Ghost here. She gestured to the white wolf, who had been observing the proceedings with his usual calculating intelligence, has started teaching our newer residents his own techniques for conflict resolution. Teaching? Thalcor's diplomatic training couldn't quite hide his astonishment. You allow them to? Instruct each? Allow? Winter laughed. We encourage it. Every species has something to teach if you're willing to learn. Speaking of which, she nodded toward where Xyrith was still trying to maintain his dignity, despite being thoroughly outmaneuvered by what he had dismissed as lesser beings. The young hunter, catching her look, straightened his ceremonial cloak. I may have acted hastily, he admitted, his combat spines remaining firmly retracted. Happens to the best of us, Winter assured him. The question is, what are you going to do with that realization? Xyrith looked at his supreme leader, now engaged in what appeared to be a deeply philosophical exchange of purrs with a lion, then at the tigers solving puzzles that would impress their top scientists, and finally, at the wolf who had taught him about gravity the hard way. His response would be quoted in Nx'thari training manuals for generations to come. I believe I have much to learn. The transformation extended beyond the sanctuary's boundaries. In the days that followed, the Nx'thari delegation's reports to the Galactic Security Council sparked what would become known as the Great Reconsideration. Nx'thari's data, thoroughly documented with her characteristic precision, painted a picture that shook the foundations of interstellar predator theory. Krelvax, speaking before the council, stood with a noticeably different posture. His combat spines, once permanently primed for dominance displays, remained relaxed, His scales shifted through patterns that indicated not aggression, but thoughtful consideration. The humans, he declared to the assembled representatives, have not tamed their world's apex predators. They have not dominated them. They have done something far more remarkable. They have partnered with them. The council chamber erupted in murmurs. A Xyrillian representative, their crystalline form vibrating with skepticism, raised an objection. But their species shows no natural defensive capabilities, no biological weapons. How can they possibly? I once shared your skepticism, Krelvax interrupted, his scales rippling with what his species now recognized as amused wisdom. Then I watched a human female half my size convince a lion to voluntarily participate in medical examinations. I observed a tiger solving engineering puzzles for entertainment. I witnessed a wolf teaching conflict resolution more effectively than our finest combat instructor. He paused, allowing his next words to carry the weight of personal experience. Their power lies not in domination, but in understanding. Not in force, but in cooperation. They have achieved what our species, with all our natural weapons and hunting prowess, never even thought to attempt. They have made allies of their world's most dangerous being. The council's response was immediate and divided. Some species, particularly those with similar predatory backgrounds to the Nx'thari, reacted with disbelief. Others, especially those who had experienced humanity's unique approach to problem-solving, nodded in recognition. Meanwhile, back at Horizon's Edge, Winter was receiving an unusual request. Xerath, the young hunter who had learned humility in a snowdrift, had petitioned to remain at the sanctuary as I wish to understand, he explained, his combat spines permanently modified to display what he called his learning configuration. Not just the technique, but the philosophy behind. Winter smiled, watching as Ghost padded over to sit beside the alien who had once charged him in challenge. The wolf's calculated gaze now held something that looked remarkably like approval. You know, she said, we have a saying here on Earth. The best predator isn't the one with the sharpest claws, but the one who never needs to use. As if to punctuate her point, Starweaver chose that moment to demonstrate his latest achievement, a perfectly executed yoga pose that he had apparently learned from watching the sanctuary's morning exercise session. The sight of Earth's most formidable predator practicing downward-facing cat would have been enough to make any evolutionary biologist question their life choice. The story of how humans domesticated Earth's apex predators became required reading in xenobiology courses across the galaxy. But more than that, it became a parable about the true nature of strength, the power of understanding, and the remarkable ability of humans to turn perceived limitations into unprecedented advantage. And if, in the years that followed, visitors to Horizon's Edge occasionally witnessed an iridescent alien practicing meditation with a lion, or a white wolf teaching conflict resolution to a group of bewildered extraterrestrial diplomats, well, that was just another day at humanity's most unusual school of interstellar relations. After all, as Winter liked to say, in space, no one can hear you purr, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't try. In the months that followed, Horizon's Edge became more than just a sanctuary. It became a symbol of humanity's unique approach to the Galactic Security Council. Once dismissive of Earth's application for membership, found themselves regularly sending observers to study what they now called the Horizon Protocol. One particular evening, as the mountain sunset painted the sky in colors that made even Mexara's data tendrils pause in appreciation, Winter found Krelvax sitting quietly beside the wolf and Ghost, now officially recognized as the sanctuary's senior diplomat in fur, was teaching a group of alien delegates the finer points of You know, Krelvax said, his scales shifting through patterns that indicated deep reflection. My species spent millennia perfecting the art of hunting. We evolved every natural weapon possible, developed combat techniques that could subdue beings twice our size. He paused, watching as Eclipse demonstrated to a group of awestruck xenobiologists how she had improved on one of their puzzle boxes. Yet in all that time, we never once considered simply, asked. Winter smiled, scratching behind Starweaver's ears as the lion sprawled beside them, his silver-streaked mane catching the last rays of. Sometimes the hardest part of being strong is learning when not to be. The sanctuary's reputation grew, although not always in ways its founders expected. The Nx'thari High Command officially modified their combat training to include what they called Earth Wisdom Sessions, which mostly consisted of very confused warrior cadets learning that sometimes the most effective battle stance was a relaxed Nx'thari, once the embodiment of aggressive hunter pride, became something of a legend himself. His treatise, The Strength and Softness, Lessons from Earth's Apex Allies, became required reading in military academies across 3 spiral arms. Though some critics argued that his habit of ending each chapter with, "and then the wolf outsmarted me again," was perhaps too self-deprecating for a military text. As the stars began to emerge, Winter watched an unusual but now familiar scene unfold in the main. Ghost was leading what appeared to be a masterclass in non-violent problem resolution, demonstrated through an elaborate game of. His students included 3 Nx'thari warriors, a Xyrillian peace delegate, and a particularly enthusiastic honey badger who had appointed herself assistant instructor. "You know what the best part is?" she mused to Krelvax, who had become something of a regular visitor. "We're still learning to. Every day, these incredible beings show us new ways to understand each other, new approaches to challenges we thought we had figured." The Supreme Hunter, his combat spines now permanently modified to include what he called his wisdom configuration, nodded. "Perhaps that is humanity's greatest strength. Not that you tamed nature's most fearsome predators, but that you were humble enough to let them teach you in return." As if to emphasize his point, Starweaver chose that moment to demonstrate his newest achievement, a surprisingly graceful ballet move he had apparently learned from watching the Sanctuary's cultural exchange program. The sight of a lion attempting a pirouette would have been enough to make any conventional predator question their career choice. But then, as Earth was teaching the galaxy, conventional was highly overrated. In the end, Winter reflected, watching Ghost conclude his lesson with what could only be described as a wolf's version of a diplomatic bow. Maybe that's what all of us, human, alien, and animal alike, needed to learn. True strength isn't about who has the sharpest claws or the most impressive combat spines. It's about having the courage to put them away and try something. And somewhere in the vastness of space, in diplomatic archives and military databases, in scientific journals and cultural studies, a new phrase began to appear. They called it the Earth Paradox, the remarkable ability of a species with no natural weapons to turn the galaxy's most fearsome predators into willing partners, dedicated teachers, and occasionally enthusiastic yoga practitioners. After all, in a universe full of beings trying to prove their superiority, sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply choosing to become